calendar is based on Jesus' birth. The cross defines history. All three major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are influenced by this one event in history to some degree or other. It is something that, whether you acknowledge it or not, it is really the single most influential moment of human history. And there are very few, especially in the world where communication is available, it's hard to get away from at least hearing about this, although you may not know anything about it, at some point in your life. Your approach, not necessarily to the cross, but the who it was on that cross, is the item of significance. Because if the who was just someone special, but not really anything more than that, then the cross may for you become some lucky charm or some trinket that you hang around your neck, or that you hang up in your house in various designs and decorations, and probably not much more than that. But if you come to realize that the who that hung on the cross is much more than that, is someone greater, then the cross probably takes on a whole new meaning for you, a whole brand new significance that really determines the scope of your life. This morning, as we look at Mark chapter 15, we're going to look at different perspectives. Mark shows us different perspectives of people as they gathered around the cross of Christ. And we're able to get a glance at their approach, their perspective of who this was, and hopefully be able to glean something from ourselves, be challenged from ourselves about their certain perspectives. Mark chapter 15, we're going to start with verse 25. Mark 15, verse 25. Mark writing says, and it was the third hour, which is roughly about noon. Take it back. We're about 9 a.m. The first hour is 6 a.m. Third hour is 9 a.m. The sixth hour would be noon. Third hour being 9 a.m. when they were crucified him. And the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others, he can save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe him." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. And when the sixth hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the ninth hour. And at the ninth hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And some of the bystanders, hearing it, said, "Behold, he is calling Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." May God bless the reading of his word. It's verse 25. So it is 9 o'clock in the morning. They're crucifying Christ. And we see the first group of folks that Mark mentions here, the Roman soldiers, the Romans. And as they crucify him, they place an inscription above his head saying, "This is the King of the Jews." For the Romans, this was just another crucifixion. For them, they had mastered this art. They were experts at this art. They had mastered it so much that they could draw it out. And it was such an excruciating event for the person being crucified, because the Romans knew just exactly how much pressure to put and where to put and all this to bring them to this point, that the person usually died not suddenly, but after a long drawn out, and died of exhaustion, and usually fell unconscious before they suffocated in their asphyxiation, basically. The Romans were masters at this. It was something common. It would not have been uncommon to see crosses and crucifixes around, not just in this one season of the year, because this is what the Romans did. They put their enemies on display, saying, "You cross us, this is what happens." This was common. And so for the Romans, as they approached this is just another day on the job. For this garrison, this squad that is in charge of taking care of this crucifixion, this is just another task for them to complete. In fact, this is probably a very frustrating task because this was really kind of brought on them by those pesky Jewish leaders who keep trying to manipulate the things, and Pilate having no other recourse but you guys take care of this person. And so because the Jewish people can't kill folk, it's up to the Romans to do it. And so we get called out on a day we could be doing something else, and we're tasked with doing this. But for the Romans, this was just another day. There are those who will approach this week, and this is just another week. There's another week that they may see the certain billboards about Easter. It's just another week where the History Channel and National Geographic channels post videos of who was Jesus and all this kind of stuff, but it's just another week. And they approach this week as it's just those pesky Christians putting up this stuff and doing what they do. Come Monday, all this will go away and we'll get back to our normal lives. But it's just another week. I trust that as a follower of Jesus, this would not just be another week, but a week of praise to God that for 7 days we can intentionally, although we do this throughout the year, but we intentionally turn our focus to the singular event, and probably better said, the singular events that mark who we are. For were it not for the cross and cross and resurrection, Christianity would be meaningless. May we not approach this as just another week. Verse 27 says, and with him they crucified two robbers, one his right, one his left. Verse 29, and those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, aha! You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross. Not only were the Romans there were the people, the masses. Among these, people who had followed him like groupies for the last 2.5 years to 3 years. They may have been there at the feeding of the 5,000, may have been there again at the feeding of the 4,000. They may have seen Jesus heal and obviously heard some of the things that he said. Possibly they had been there just a few weeks before when Lazarus rose from the dead, when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. And yet they come, and in this moment, the cross for them is a frustration. It is an incredible frustration. Because these are the people who, as groupies, come to the Lord saying, we're here because of what you give to us. We expected the Messiah to free us from these Romans over here, and you haven't done that. You haven't met my needs. You haven't done what I needed for you to do. You haven't gone by my definition of who you should be. And now that I see you dying, all those hopes and dreams of what you should have been are not going to be. And this is an incredible frustration for them. Because who they wanted Jesus to be, their genie on a bottle, the Coke machine where I can maybe stick in a quarter and hit the button and get something for myself, all of it's coming to an end at this very time as my hopes and dreams are hanging on this cross. And they're left with no other recourse then but to jeer at what just hours earlier, all their hopes and dreams have been placed on a bad definition of who they thought this person was. And now that they can't see beyond this, they're left with just, Jesus, you ruined it for me. And so they deride him. There are those that live that way. And they're mad at the government, they're mad at their neighbor, they're mad at their parents because they have ruined it and they're not providing all their wants in their hand. In our society of consumers, this is what we want, is what have you done for me lately? And God, if you haven't done what I want you to do now, then it's over. I need another sign. I need you to prove to me that you still love me. And they're frustrated because they don't get what they want. These were the people around the cross. The people who just days earlier, Hosanna, Hosanna, come on in. And all of a sudden, when Jesus begins to tell them, it ain't like that. And all of a sudden, he's hanging on the cross. Well, it's all over now. Who's going to save me now? Let us not approach God as the people, needing him to provide us another sign of why we should trust him, needing him to prove himself to us. Let us not approach our trials and issues of life saying, God, if you really love me, you wouldn't allow for this to happen to me. The cross dashed all their misplaced hopes. It becomes the symbol of their despair and suffering, and so they lash out in ignorance. Verse 31, so also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, he saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe. The religious leaders couldn't get past their own position and arrogance, partially with the same ill that the people had, and expecting the Messiah to free them from the Romans so that they could become now the authority figures over the people. They had maneuvered themselves into positions and knew that because of the religious nature of the Hebrew people, they could manipulate the people very well because they knew the law. They knew how to word it. The people regarded them because of the Old Testament, because of the Levites, and the Levites being the mediators between the people and God. There was nothing wrong with that, but what was wrong was that the Sadducees and Pharisees were manipulating that relationship and using it for their own benefit. And because they found out they could not control Jesus, and he did not meet their expectation of setting them up and getting them rid of the Romans so that they could be the ones in ruling power, here they are, again, asking him, well, show us a sign. Help us believe that this is really who you are. Jesus previously, Matthew 12:39, had already answered them. An evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and yet no sign will be given to it, but the sign of Jonah, the prophet. You see, they had all the signs that they needed. They didn't need another sign. They needed to get past their own self-righteousness and pride. 1 Corinthians 1:22, Paul tells us, he says, for indeed Jews ask for signs and Greeks search for wisdom. Paul goes on to say, we come preaching solely the cross of Christ, which is a stumbling block for the Jews and folly for the Gentiles. You see, faith is not the result of seeing wonders. Faith is the condition for them. If you have faith, you can see God working without massive signs. You can see him as he heals those that you have been praying for. You can see it as he gives you insight into his word that you have been longing for. You can see it as he provides for you on a daily basis. If you didn't wake up this morning, look out and see it this morning, there's no hope for you. Gorgeous, gorgeous morning. But the cross means total surrender. The cross means he increases and I decrease. The cross means it's no longer about me. And see, the taunt of the religious leaders assumes self-preservation. Says he saved others, why can't he save himself? It assumes that this is what's key in life, is that the most important thing in life is for me to make my life longer, for me to preserve myself, for me to make my life comfortable, for me to extend this. And that's not Jesus at all. Jesus said, I came to give my life as a ransom for many. You know how many of y'all were here on time this morning, a little bit before the video this morning? No one knew his secret ambition until he gave his life away. The cross means slavery. And that's not a word we like to use because of the connotations of it, but that's exactly what it means. It means that I submit myself to my master, who is Jesus Christ. And just as Christ said of his Father, he said, the Son, I assure you, the Son does nothing but that the Father shows him what to do. And whatever the Father does, the Son does it exactly the same way. We should get to that point where it's not about my talents, not about my gifts, not about my know-how, that I do nothing except what the Master tells me to do. And as Jesus said in his parable, then as people say, well, David, well done. Don't thank me. I was just only doing my duty. A slave only does their job. That's all they have privilege to do. They have no rights. And yet that is such a foreign concept because we do not like that word. But that is exactly who God calls us to be. And why is that such a good thing? Because I serve the creator of the universe. And the grace that he has given to me provides me a life incredibly abundant. That if I choose to step out of slavery, I really step into bondage because I step back into a life where I can't do anything right, that leads to death. And so I choose to walk in slavery as most as I can. Not perfect at it, but that's what God is called to. And that's what the cross calls us to. It demands my death in order to have life. For I am crucified with Christ, and yet I live, yet not I, but Christ who lives within me. And the life I live, I now live by the grace of God and the love of Jesus Christ, who died for me and gave himself for me. Jesus is a ransom. My sole desire becomes Christ at this point. Otherwise, the cross is a stumbling block. I was once on a plane heading from Fort Worth to El Paso, and sitting next to me was a young lady who had a T-shirt, and just all over the T-shirt was just a cross. I don't normally talk to people on the plane, but I got up the nerve to just ask her, I said, young lady, what does that cross mean to you? This was her answer. Nothing. Just like the T-shirt. That was exactly her answer. There's a whole lot of people. And even right now, this week, I haven't seen any here, but up in the Metroplex, there's a group that puts billboards up, anti-Easter, basically. The cross is a stumbling block. They just can't get over it. How can life come from the death of somebody? To the Jews who are still waiting for the Messiah, all they see is Jesus on the cross, and that the fact that that could not be our Messiah because of the cross. Islam, Jesus could not be God because God would not allow his son to die on the cross. That must have been Judas. And for some, the cross is foolishness. They just don't get it. They can't get over it. It's, why would God do it this way? And so we come to it sometimes. And for sometimes the cross is stumbling block to us because of our ego and our pride. And God, I did it this way before and you bless it. Why can't I keep doing it this way now? Or, well, I don't, I pray some days and some days I don't. And, God's given me talent. I move on and things get done and, life goes on. Why do I need to depend on him all the time? And for others, just the foolishness of it, of why do you people put so much emphasis on this? There can't just be one way. A God of love wouldn't send people to hell. There can't just be one way. In an interlude between these perspectives, Mark tells us that noon hits and darkness hits the land, and then about the third hour, Jesus cries out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" We won't follow this topic this morning, but basically at this point, God is putting all the sins of the world on Jesus and has no other recourse but to turn his back on his Son, because where sin is, God cannot be. And the mystery of how all this works, I have no earthly idea. But at that moment is the moment that Jesus dreaded more than any other moment in the world. And yet the people are standing around going, "Oh, he's calling Elijah." And they go and get a sponge with vinegar and put it to it and say, "Hey, let's see if Elijah's..." They still don't get it. Their ignorance and not paying attention to what Jesus was trying to teach them, because his teachings just could not get past their definition of who they thought he should be. Jesus utters a loud cry and breathes his last. As I mentioned before, most of the people who died in crucifixion died from exhaustion and asphyxiation, not Jesus. Jesus died violently. He died at his time, because his death was a death imposed on him by God, not by the Romans. It was his time. Just before this, you have, says, those who were crucified with him also reviled him. We see the criminals on the cross who are deriding Jesus. Another gospel tells us that one specifically said, "If you really are the Son of God, save yourself and then save us." And the criminals on the cross could not see Jesus for anything other than, "Hey, he's just one of us. He's up here because, I know why I'm up here. He must be up here for the same reason. He's just one of us. And we're all in this together." And so, he's no different than I. And yet Jesus was very different, because Jesus was not up there for a crime that he committed. He was not up there for his own sin. He was up there for the sin of the world. The thief was far away from the purpose of God for his life. Jesus was fulfilling his. In many desperate places of life we drag ourselves to, and perhaps think it was God who brought us here. But it's not in many of those times. Many of those places, when we get to desperate times, it's because we, through our sin, got us in those locations. God didn't take you there, but God meets you there. God will meet you there. And he will offer you his hand, and he will say, "If you will come back, let me show you the way out of this." It was not God who took those criminals to the cross, but God met them there. And one of them got saved. One of them ended up in paradise with Jesus later that day. 15:37. Jesus utters a loud cry, breathes his last, and says, "The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing him saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, 'Truly this man was the Son of God.'" Go back and remember, Mark is in Rome while he's writing this gospel, more than likely. He's writing it to a Roman audience. And he has just told them, the Jews, the Jewish leaders, the people, didn't get it. Didn't understand what was going on and had a bad perspective of what was going on. But the person who did get it, the person who did understand that day, is the very same person who, as he's calling out to Jesus, you are the Son of God, this is the person who has sworn allegiance to another who claims to be the Son of God, and yet this Roman centurion is giving that title to someone else. A person who was as far from the people of God as a people could possibly be is the one who takes note and says, what little I have seen of this man, possibly in the last 24 hours, more or less, the centurion may have been with Jesus all the way through all this trial and stuff, but as little as he had seen, there was something about him that was different. He died in a very different way than everybody else I have crucified. He's died in a different way than anybody else I have ever seen. And in these last hours of life, he has lived them in such a way that I have no other recourse but to say, truly there is something divine about this person. It's interesting that Jesus' ministry begins with a voice declaring him as the Son of God. Now it ends with a Gentile declaring him as the Son of God, possibly in prelude to the fact that as of this moment, even it was before, but even as of this moment intentionally, God is about to open the floodgates of the gospel to the Gentile people. Because in John 11 says that he came to his own and his own did not receive him, but as many as have received him, to them he gave the power to be called the children of God. Jesus came to the Jews specifically, and they have now totally rejected him. You have the Romans, you have the people, the religious authorities, even the criminals hanging with him have all rejected him. What Mark is telling you is that Jesus died solely alone. Except for here in a couple of verses, he is going to mention some women who were there at the cross. But the people that Jesus came to seek and to save because they were lost have rejected him, and yet this Gentile, who was not the priority for Jesus' mission, is the one who has declared him, you are the Son of God. Psalm 22:27 says, all the families of the nations will bow down before him. The centurion confession is us. And it's the opportunity that God has given to us. Whereas our worship team led us and showed us the verses in 1 Peter says, once you were not a people, but now you are. Once you were outside of grace, but now you have been brought into God's grace. We have been given access to the new covenant so that all who receive him may become children of God and grafted into the tree of his people. And the centurion shows us this. He shows us that salvation, the extent of the atonement is universal. Salvation is available for all. But it's only efficient for those who will look upon it and say, truly, you are the Son of God. You are what I need. Come into my life. Be Lord of my life. Let me be your servant and slave. Rule my life and teach me anew. Grant me a new life that I might live for you. Every year I try to watch Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. If you've never seen it, it's not for kids. Although we allowed our kids to watch it this year. There's just one incredible scene that he put into the movie that's probably my favorite scene in the whole movie. And Jesus is walking down the Via Dolorosa and carrying the cross. And as he stumbles and falls, his mother, who is Mary, who is seeing him down an alley do this, she pictures Jesus as a child falling. And her need to rush to his aid and pick him up. And so she does. She rushes to Jesus. Now, none of this is in the Bible. It's a very creative look at what this is going on. But as she reaches Jesus and begins to help pick him up, with the eyes of, why is this happening? Jesus turns to her and says, Mother, I am making all things new. Just an incredible scene. That's what the cross is. It's our God making all things new. And he opens that and offers that to each one of us if we will just cling to it and say, God, I need that in my life. Michael W. Smith calls out another song. He says, why do you wear your cross of gold? Is it a state of mind or does it really find a way into your soul? Bono, the lead singer from U2, says, but with Christ we have access in a one-to-one relationship. For as in the Old Testament, it was more one of worship and awe and vertical relationship. The New Testament, on the other hand, we look across at Jesus who looks familiar and horizontal, and the combination is what makes the cross. Josh McDowell says, if Jesus Christ was who he claimed to be, and he did die on a cross at a point in time in history, then for all history past and all history future, it is relevant because that is the very focal point for forgiveness and redemption. Oh, that old rugged cross, so despised by the world, has a wondrous attraction for me. For the dear Lamb of God left his glory above to bear it to dark Calvary. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross till my trophies at last I lay down. I will cling to the old rugged cross and exchange it someday for a crown. Father, may this week more than ever, may we cling to the cross. May we die to self and allow you to be Lord of our life. And may this grant us a burden for those that we know who do not know you, that we might share it, that they might also come and join us in clinging to the cross. In Jesus' name, amen.